Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are talking national political news of the day, and the verdict you've all been waiting for is in. Well, Hunter Biden is guilty on 3 counts of gun violations, pretty much centered on him checking a box. The big one, him checking a box that said that he's not a drug addict in order to purchase a gun, when in fact he was using drugs at the time. Defense tried to thread a needle, saying that he wasn't quite using drugs for that a narrow period of time. Jury didn't buy it. I think they were out for a couple hours, and came back with a guilty verdict on all three. You would think that the Republicans would be celebrating, right? Or not celebrating, but acknowledge that, hey, justice was done. Nobody is above the law. This is the president's son, prosecuted by the president's own Department of Justice. It shows that America is a great country in a way, even if the news is kind of sad. But no, the response was, this is just part of the ongoing conspiracy. It's a distraction from the real crimes that the Biden criminal family has committed, and that this is nothing. And besides which, these are stupid laws that should be overturned anyway. These are, we're kind of in a little bit of, who do we root for here? These are gun regulations that shouldn't even be in effect. I mean, if you're taking drugs, you should be allowed to buy guns, I guess, is what some of them are saying. Matt Gaetz even kind of downplays it. Well, it was kind of dumb. I don't know if he was saying that the prosecution was dumb or Hunter Biden was kind of dumb. Of course, Hunter Biden is also facing a little bit more serious tax violation allegations on the West Coast. When the settlement or the plea bargaining broke down, the charges all got separated, and really got separated by 3,000 miles when the judge didn't accept an overall plea bargain. And of course, the Republicans want him convicted for having roped the vice presidency into influencing getting a prosecutor fired in Ukraine to protect his company. And of course, that wasn't exactly what happened. In fact, as we've discussed on this show, the prosecutor was no longer even investigating his company. That file was closed, but we don't have to get into that. Let's talk about the political impact and fallout of this conviction. Dave, what have you got?
Just generally speaking about the charges themselves, specifically, he does face for these 3 felonies up to 25 years in prison, up to $750,000 in fines. So they're not small theoretically, but of course, because of the terms, typically. It'll be we'll see what happens. We can get into sentencing in a few minutes, but the charges are false statement in purchase of a firearm, false statement related to the information that a firearms dealer must maintain on file. So basically that's like 2 forms, and then possession of a firearm by a person addicted to a controlled substance. So they used some evidentiary and witness testimony and texts and things to say, hey, you were an addict slightly before it, you were an addict slightly after it. It's disingenuous defense to say, hey, but during that week I was okay. So that's why I think the jury just only took a couple hours, 3 hours, I think we heard, to find him guilty on all 3 charges. We don't know what the punishment's going to be. Of course, there's going to be appeals. But I think the federal guidelines are he may end up doing between 1 year and 2 years in prison. So it's not small.
Not small. There was no crime involved with the gun. That's usually what happens with these charges.
But. Yeah, I think agreed. I know you're the lawyer, and I always defer almost like 99.9% of the time to any insights you have. I'll just add to that one person said that 92% of the time, people in this situation will get jail time. Only 8% they won't. But that's because this is such a rare charge. It's almost never brought up in under these circumstances. Typically, they'll like raid the house of a drug dealer. They'll find a crime. Then they'll say, "Hey, you're doing this crime. You got the gun. You're doing the drugs. All the things. You get some jail." So it's typically not as let's just say detached from any other crime. But so big picture, politically speaking, I want to start with like what you said, that because in this instance, it's a little bit of a tragedy for the Biden family. It doesn't help Biden's chances or his reputation in any way. But people, generally speaking, have empathy for people, for families when one of their loved ones are going through this. Maybe there's a little bit of projection, like, oh, this family's got problems that we don't like or we don't agree with the president, and this is, for whatever reason, attached to the way that they do business, right? Like you said, a lot of Republican talking points are about the Biden crime family, and but so I think that some of their other talking points kind of there's a little bit of merit. So one of them was that there was a tentative plea deal that was thrown out by the judge because the terms were excessively favorable, and there was, depending on what news coverage you watch, what they're saying is that the plea bargain that he was going to enter was going to be plead guilty to the gun charge in return for no jail time and no future charges for other non-related alleged crimes. So it's going to like exonerate him from any kind of prosecution related to any of the, we'll call them political charges that we're hearing about related to Ukraine and other things, but also the taxes. So that the judge kind of said on the face of it, we're not going to, we're only here for the gun charges. We're not going to give him, amnesty or whatever the word is, absolve him from responsibility for all these other crimes. So that's kind of why
and
this
I'm surprised that was even done, because I don't think that judge even had the jurisdiction to grant that. I mean, outside of it, somebody filed it in another court somewhere. They're going to say, okay, it's nice that that judge said that, but
yeah,
I don't even think it could have happened. But
so I think sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, so when people, like I think when the critics of the administration were saying this, like the case is and the conviction are to a certain extent a distraction from the real air quotes story behind the scenes about the other degrees of self-dealing and other things. And now there's lots of people shooting that down as saying, hey, it's just a tragic crime, and it's the wheels, the court is operating the way the wheels of justice are moving forward. The courts are operating the way they should. You already mentioned the distraction from the other crimes, but I think this is another good one, which I hadn't heard of before. That so this case, people are talking about the appeal, and the question is like, well, what might be the grounds for an appeal? And so on. Again, this is Fox News and some other sort of conservative media ecosystem talking points. One of the things that was brought up was that, well, the Supreme Court is already going to hear about this spectrum of Second Amendment privileges that are being taken away by the overreach of the power of the government to regulate. And they're saying is, if you have a mental health problem, then there's the potential for that, like red flag laws, for example, to take away your Second Amendment right. Whereas if you just say I don't mean just, but at the other end of the spectrum, if you have an alcoholism problem, it's very unlikely the government's going to come step in and say, and you don't have a privilege to have guns. But then this drug addiction thing is probably somewhere in between, some combination of mental and substance abuse. So from the, I guess, again, conservative or far right ecosystem, they're saying this is a classic case that we potentially the Supreme Court might actually say, hey, it's more like alcohol than it is like mental health, and then therefore these laws aren't constitutional in the first place. So that's kind of, I think, one of the threads of thought to turn this into a Second Amendment issue as opposed to on the merits.
It'd be pretty ironic if Biden kid, well, not kid, but Biden lands himself a big Second Amendment win for the NRA. I mean, in terms of any crime involving Ukraine, self-dealing and all that, those statutes are starting to run. We're getting pretty heavy in there. They had a whole committee dedicated to unlocking those crimes. They've got nothing. Comer's got nothing, zero. At this point, if they did, there would have been criminal referrals. I mean, they've already got other criminal referrals they're making for other things. They don't have any criminal referrals for him or the president. So it's really just down to the taxes. There's nothing else that they're going to have. I think like the longest statute of limitation they can even hope for is 6 years, and I think we're pardon me, 8 years, and we're getting to that point pretty quickly. Pretty soon. So they don't have anything. So what they're going to say is, well, the Biden administration messed it up. They didn't, do anything. But if there wasn't a referral from that committee, the Republicans probably made a big mistake by having this Comer committee there. If they didn't, they could have blamed it on the DOJ. But now, absent an actual referral, they can't. They're going to have a hard time blaming that on the DOJ. So but they still got to scream about it, and they're in this mess. I do think that we have to look at some other dynamics too. I mean, of this, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion of it on Fox News and the rest as the trial was happening. They certainly didn't take the films of Jill Biden walking him in, because that provided a big contrast with Trump. Now, Eric Trump wasn't around there, but where was Melania during his trial, right? And that was a big contrast. Joe Biden didn't attend, and Biden has said that he's not going to. Has already said he's not going to. He's not committed as to whether or not there'll be a commutation, but there's definitely he's not going to use his powers to take away the crime in any other respect. And probably won't even commute a sentence if he is sentenced to jail. Like I said, I'm anticipating that there will be probably a jail sentence that's suspended, and that he's got to continue and stay in recovery and not do anything, and probably a big fine. I suspect that that's what's going to happen.
I think that makes sense, on the merits that once he gets through his probation hearing and, a few months down the road, up to 4 months into the future, when they do have a sentencing, it might be one of those things where it's like you said, suspended sentence, probation, and fine. I think that potentially is reasonable. But that also, if that's the case, and if he is sort of, if the wheels of justice treat him fairly, where he's, the public shaming is one thing, and the being found guilty is also additional burden, additional punishment. But I still think that the main sort of judo in the media right now is, like you said, there's some conspiracy aspect of this all, which is, well, by this conviction, it allows the White House and the president to say, see, it's not super political. This is taking its course. But then I know they're making the next step also. And they're saying, well, actually, it turns out that there are crimes they could have charged him for that they're just not. So, for example, like I believe he never registered as a lobbyist for a foreign entity. Right. And so that's a pretty open and shut case, you would think. So that's kind of a little bit of, maybe a broken clock is right twice a day. But one more thing, and then I'll throw it back to you. The other thing is that I heard somebody say that the potential defense for not doing that is that he didn't actually engage in any lobbying.
That's right.
The reality of it is he took money out of convenience because of his relationship to powerful people, but he actually never did anything.
That's right. So, no, if anybody has a gripe, it's the companies that that he worked for who paid him all this money, Burisma, for his access, and he never delivered. He's a BS artist. That's the biggest thing. He didn't have it. He got him a 10-minute conversation at the airport, right? And we don't even know what was said at that thing, but he didn't deliver anything. They should sue him to get his money back. But if they had solid evidence of lobbying for a foreign agent and not registering, the Comey committee would have referred it to the Department of Justice, and they don't have it. They have nothing. All they've got is the taxes and the gun charge. That's what they came up with. That's what they have. And so if there's this grand conspiracy, then we have to at least acknowledge that the Comey committee is just completely inept if there's that much evidence out there, because they did not have it. That's what should have happened, but it didn't. Anyway, I'll let you close it out.
The last thing I would say here is that there is a degree of political theater, or a strong degree, depending on your perspective, across the entirety of the Biden crime family narrative. And that includes both Hunter Biden's real and imagined crimes, but it extends beyond that. Anywhere that the family business went, I think that there has been some claims made about the immorality or unethical nature. But was there anything illegal? Certainly not. And in fact, that's what an awful lot of wealthy, connected, powerful people do, is they leverage their connections and their influence. And so it might not be the most tasteful way to engage in business, but I think on the merits, it appears that there's no there in almost all of these claims.
My revenge will be success, and I mean that. But it's awfully hard when you see what they've done. These people are so evil. They all said lock her up, and I felt, and I could have done it, but I felt it would have been a terrible thing. And then this happened to me. And so I may feel differently about it. I can't tell you, I'm not sure I can answer the question. Hillary Clinton, I didn't say lock her up, but the people would all say lock her up, lock her up. Okay, then we won. And I said pretty openly, I say, all right, come on, just relax. Let's go. We're going to make our country great.
Every time I mention her, everyone screams lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. They keep screaming. I've been nice. I don't have to be so nice anymore.
I used to say, just came out, lock her up is right. For what she's done, they should lock her up.
Next topic. Trump, former President Trump, is threatening, if he has come to office, and especially since his conviction, to prosecute and to arrest and prosecute his political enemies. And he is saying he absolutely has the right to do that. Now, certainly, if any of the Democrats or his political enemies, actually even in the Republican Party, have committed crimes, the Department of Justice absolutely has the right to press charges. And I keep hearing this. Well, they've opened up a precedent to this. Now the Republicans are going to do it. The Democrats are going to regret having opened this door. And we're going to go into this. The problem that they have is, it's fine to press charges, but you have to convince a jury, 12 jurors of it. You have to present evidence and convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. And even they keep saying, well, this was in a blue area where they all hate Trump. I'm sorry. I'm convinced that even if you go to Alabama, which is pro-red, and you try to press false charges, and these are 12 honest people, and with jury selection, you're probably going to get at least a few people that do believe in due process, and you have bogus charges, then you're not going to get a conviction. So be ready. It's fine, press your charges, but be ready to not only have a non-conviction, but be ready for that Democratic figure or whatever, to come back at you with malicious prosecution and possibly false arrest charges. So that's why I don't take all that very seriously. However, we do have threats from Donald Trump specifically. Now, last time around in 2016, he's now denying having said it, but he did say lock her up. And in fact, Jon Stewart has a very funny little piece about that. Nothing ever happened. I guess he's saying that, I didn't want to start that kind of a precedent. But he is making some interesting threats, and he is also saying that he's going to fire all the generals because they're too woke and replace them. And we got Project 2025. So is he really going to shake up the whole government and start a new type of authoritarian rule in which we don't really have due process anymore? I mean, it is kind of scary. But let's focus on his threats to retaliate against his political enemies and who he's talking about. I mean, will he go after Bill Bragg? Will he go after any of the 12 jurors? For instance, anybody he's really mad at. So what we need talking about is this very real? And there are people, including people who have worked with him, who say you need to take this seriously. And it's very interesting that in his former cabinet, I think there are like 2 people who have endorsed him publicly. So there are people who have worked with him who are saying take this seriously. The discussion goes on, but even if he's not serious, it's inappropriate to make this threat. But unfortunately, even the so-called liberal media is out there saying, well, that's just Donald Trump. And it's kind of getting tiresome because those are very serious threats to make. That you are going to be the most powerful man in the world, and you're going to have the ability to follow through on these threats. He's also talking about just completely dismantling the DOJ and replacing it with whatever. And so how serious are these threats, Dave?
So I'm going to look at this from 2 perspectives. Firstly, there's obviously a great number of people out there who remember things like the lock her up chants at his rallies and on the debate stage with Hillary Clinton, where he was standing next to her and she made a comment about how the country would be worse off with someone like Trump elected as president, and he said, "Because you'll be in jail." So it's obviously something that he thinks about, and so I'll just point out, like, high level, it's clearly something that not only he thinks about regularly, he also makes sure to make it part of his brand. He uses it at chants and rallies, like I said. He puts it out there in social media, and his surrogates speak to this too. And that give and take, that for lack of a better way to say it, that alpha male tough guy approach to how you define yourself and compare to who you identify as your enemies, your political enemies. For him, my true belief is that he thinks it's a win-win. The tougher he looks, the tougher the language, he builds up the base. Because clearly he does not have a political strategy to expand his appeal. He just really doubling down, tripling down over the years on just having his supporters be more and more enthusiastic and reliable, and depending on who you are, some people say it's cultish behavior, but I think that goes it may be right, it may be wrong, but it's not necessary to use a slur, because just to defend what you had said, in reality, even if it's not serious, it's serious enough that people obviously need to take it seriously. So during his first 4 years, did you see any kind of mass incarcerations? Did we see any did we see any of the behaviors authoritarian leaders the language that he uses clearly is authoritarian, but did we see yes, we saw xenophobia. We saw locking down the borders and discriminating to a certain extent against, for example, the Muslim ban, or immigrants at the southern border, saying certain things that are offensive. Obviously, there's tons of that stuff. But that's kind of my like cultural angle. But there's also an analytical angle. And there was a group called Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, crew, and they did a study of 13,000 of his social media messages. I'll hand it over to you before I get into detail about their details of the study. But the truth is that even though the study is making very strong claims about how very serious this is, he's threatened FBI, Justice Department he's threatened, suggested that action should be taken against senators, judges, Biden's immediate family, nonprofit organizations. So when you go down the list, it's a lot of severe, claims that he's made, a lot of problematic pronouncements. But at the end of the study, the reality is, after all of the details, after all of the things that are highly suspect behavior, they only identified 25 times in the last year and a half that he's actually threatened people in writing, like explicitly. So when we do the list and we say, oh, he's done these awful things to these half dozen to a dozen groups, it's actually only been 25 times, according to a very close analysis. It's just that that's only 18 months. So it shows, the pattern shows that, more frequently than once a month, some outrageously, concerning statement gets made. So that's the thing. Like, we really have to assess. And I'll just say one more thing and then I'll hand it over, I promise. So they said they could sum up this study in one statement that Trump made, and it says, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." And he sent around a word cloud of all of his speeches, and the number one biggest word of all the speeches that he made, that Trump even sent this himself, the big word was revenge. So I think when we say he's targeting his enemies, it's a personal vendetta paradigm, a personal vendetta prism. It's not quite the society-wide, culture-wide, America-wide, worldwide authoritarian, vitriolic statements to be afraid of. So it's a little bit nuanced here, but I'm just, I just wanted you to know about that study.
Well, the the line in what was the movie The Untouchables that Al Capone gives, that's right out of that. Somebody messes with me, I mess with them. I mean, it's right out of that. I mean, it doesn't even know what that sounds like. Anyway, the thing he has done, though, is that he didn't break any laws while he was president until after the election. And then he did, in an authoritarian way, try to hold on to power, and stretched the laws at that point, and stretched the boundaries of the checks and balances. And he wasn't really prepared. It was a poorly conceived plan. He's probably not going to bother with John Eastman anymore. I mean, because that was really a lame plan. But but he is willing to do that. He showed himself willing to do that, and people support it. And the fact of the matter is there are a number of people in the United States right now who are willing to, even at least temporarily, give up on democracy in order for him to clean up the country. That is the reality. So if they, by that they're willing to support this, and is he willing to do this? We don't know. I mean, we don't know. And will the system of checks and balances hold against his push to do that? Will there be people, enough people in it? But he wants to clean it out. Project 2025. He wants to completely change, the people in it. Held because the Department of Justice rebelled last time. They threatened to quit en masse. And he has now threatened to dismantle the Department of Justice. He doesn't want that happening again, right? He wants to replace the generals, everything. He is going to want to install people who are loyal, and he has a Supreme Court that seems to be backing him on a lot of things. Was this whole thing for the presidential immunity? Did they deliberately drag it out for him? I don't know. I don't know if they were motivated by that or just felt like they weren't bound to speed it up in any way, even though there's precedent for speeding things up for an election. Eileen Cannon in Florida appears to have possibly killed the case with her incompetence. Was it deliberate? I don't know. I mean, if there are just really strange signs happening, and he has also talked about putting down urban demonstrations using military force. I mean, it's not. We don't have a precedent for it in this country, and other than in fiction, but you know what freaked out a lot of people was that the scenario that was happening on January 6th looked a lot like, kind of like what happened in The Handmaid's Tale, right? I mean, it was eerie, the similarities, only it didn't happen, but it just was. And so, we have ideas about the way things can happen. And I can't say it won't happen. I will say I think it's more likely than not that the system of checks and balances will hold again if he's elected. But I certainly can't guarantee it.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously what you say has merit. I just know that there's like a runaway train of people that don't support Donald Trump are to a certain extent drinking, breathing through a straw, feeling like the drowning in the his flirtation with authoritarianism post January 6th. Like, so I wanted to just kind of play devil's advocate for a minute there with us and say, there's a chance that this is just not quite as overwhelming as it appears on the surface, right? But so let's kind of pivot to, well, what did this study recommend? This Crew organization, they're saying there was a law that was already passed in the House, but it died in the Senate, called the Protecting Our Democracy Act back in 2021, and it's designed to curb abuses of power of presidents of both parties, strengthen Congress's ability to fulfill its role, to provide a check on the executive overreach, and also secure elections from foreign influence. So those elements of this law, like, we need to revisit that. It's a bipartisan concept to have safe and fair elections, to have a constrained executive branch, and also to just generally speaking curb abuses of power. So that's they want us to start talking about the solutions rather than dwell on the perceived problems, which I think is sort of an admirable thing for people to start considering, especially in light of Project 2025. I don't know if you saw it, Eric, but The Guardian had an article just yesterday, maybe 2 days ago, that our very own Congress member Representative Jared Huffman is kind of the point person in Congress for preparing for Project 2025, so that if the event that Donald Trump does win in November, that there are institutions within the government and outside of the government prepared to address the things that program has laid out. We've talked about it on our different show, and I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but I do want to mention finally about this, that with Project 2025, they are talking about massive changes to how the government is staffed and how the government works. They go line by line through each element of the government. And just to remind people, there was a Project 2021. There was a Project 2017, right? Like, so they do this every 4 years. When Trump got elected, he put in place over 95%, I think I remember, 95% of what was in the plan was prioritized and passed by his administration. So that is not an idle threat. Project 2025 is something, it is a roadmap, and it's part and parcel to what the conversation we've had here.
What we are seeing here is an extraordinary breach of not just the trust and the stature of the Supreme Court, but we are seeing a fundamental challenge to our democracy. Samuel Alito has identified himself with the same people who raided the Capitol on January 6th and is now going to be presiding over court cases that have deep implications over the participants of that rally.
Okay, Alito's way. Justice Alito and his wife continue to be in the news. This time, maybe not entirely their fault, but there was an event at which they were present, and a liberal filmmaker named Lauren Windsor was there kind of undercover, got in by pretending to be a conservative activist. She the Supreme Court Historical Society, and she started asking questions of actually got to talk to Chief Justice Roberts as well, but started asking questions. And she started, just to briefly recap, she asked Roberts questions and he was straight out, well, shouldn't we be fighting a war to win? And Justice Roberts basically said, no, I'm here to basically adjudicate the law and not to fight a partisan battle. But speaking to Alito, he did kind of agree. He said, yeah, only one side can win. We do have to find ways to live with each other peaceably, but yes, we do have to win. And then even more chilling, had a conversation with Mrs. Alito, in which she said, the statute for defamation is 5 years. Kind of implying that once Justice Alito has retired, and if Trump can win the presidency so that he can replace him, that he will, and that she'll be suing for defamation. She's going to get back at some of these people in the media, and I assume meaning that New York Times versus Sullivan would be overturned, so that she wouldn't have to have that cumbersome malice requirement which is required when you're a public figure. And as of now, she is in fact a public figure. I have some qualms about the method of pretending you're someone else to elicit comments from people, but these were freely given. She thought she was talking to a fellow reactionary, and she said exactly what she meant. Comparisons have been made with James O'Keefe, who is sort of the left-wing person, the right-wing equivalent, who also did some of these, sneaky, I'm not the person, I'm someone other than who I'm pretending to be, events that brought down Acorn, for instance. And I would beg to differ. For one thing, this woman did something that he doesn't do, is she didn't just reveal what the Alito said, she revealed what Roberts said, which completely exonerated him, and pointed out, he takes his job seriously as a Supreme Court justice. O'Keefe had material in which people at Acorn and other places actually said things that were pretty decent, but he focused on the things that hurt the people that he wanted to hurt, and did not release the other things. He got into trouble for that, actually, because it was considered doctoring at a certain point when he was cutting certain things out. She didn't do that. She got the material and laid it all out for everyone. But I still have questions about that kind of a journalism, where you're pretending to be someone you aren't, getting somebody to open up to you. On the other hand, I'm kind of glad we have that information. So, it's because it has revealed that, and again now with Clarence Thomas now having admitted he also didn't disclose additional favors, we're learning we've got a very problematic Supreme Court, and we've learned that now. And there is now a little bit of fight going on over at Congress about coming up with some ethics rules for the Supreme Court, something that the Republicans are fighting to prevent, and something Justice Roberts refused to even have a discussion about. So.
Yeah, so you laid out quite a bit there. I'll try to parse it a little bit, just to differentiate between the lanes. But firstly, about the actual technique itself, I think Lauren Windsor, one of the things that she's been making the rounds, talking about the undercover recordings. And so one of the things that she said was, hey, I'm a paying member of the group. And I went, not just recently, but I went the year earlier. And I also spoke with them. And they, particularly Justice Alito, he didn't say anything controversial. Everything was so vanilla that she didn't even report on it. It was standard fare. There was no. She did presumably try to lead them a little bit, but then nothing came of it. Fast forward to this past year, since there's been claims against Justice Alito and his wife, and demands against the court for ethics reform, among other things, in light of gifts, unreported gifts, and favoritism for both Justice Thomas and Scalia, deceased Justice Scalia. So there is a pattern of influence peddling, so to speak, from people, including billionaires, who have business before the court and who benefited from favorable outcomes in some cases, allegedly. So it's a very contentious time to be one of these justices on this court. And particularly, right now it's highly contentious because of the January 6th related cases could have an impact on, for example, Trump's liability based on his actions. And so the fact that Alito and Thomas are not recusing themselves, it's front and center. So that's painting that's setting the stage. And so what about this exact event? I would say that you said it, but I'm going to repeat it because I think it's worth saying. She came to him and said, hey, shouldn't our country be heading more towards godliness? Shouldn't we be heading more towards morality? Shouldn't the court have a role in our establishing higher moral principles for our country? And Alito was at first it kind of sounded like he was just yesing her a little bit, like taking the bait, being led. But then he went on to actually I was going to say pontificate, but that's not actually what I mean. He went on to just reveal. He said some things you cannot compromise. Basically he said you can't split the difference. So
Right.
If there are people saying, hey, we're going to need more godliness, and people saying we're going to need more separation of church and state, he's saying, well, one's going to win and one's not. Now, you could read her critically, the way her approach, because I mean, they were leading questions. There's no doubt. But if he was like Roberts, then there would have been some polite dismissal, some higher ground, some acknowledgement of like the philosopher role and the detached, non-political role the courts are supposed to have, at least publicly. Now, granted, I do get that. Yes, from a logical perspective, if you are either going to be more in line with religious principles or less in line with religious principles, then there's no compromise. So to a certain extent, that shows the prism that these people, that at least Justice Alito rather, is viewing it. And then so I'll pivot real quick to his wife, Martha Ann Alito. Her candor was a whole nother level.
Yeah.
Like she's obviously highly politically charged and motivated and proud about that. She was basically saying, when I have to look across the lagoon and see the pride flag for a month during Pride Month, I need to fight back with something she said I wanted to raise the Sacred Heart of Jesus flag, which is like a crown of thorns around a heart, and I've seen it before. I'm Catholic. I was raised Catholic, so I've seen it before. But she said I deferred to my husband's request not to raise that flag. But when he's no longer a justice, she sort of insinuated, I've got an idea. I'm going to put a new flag out every week. And she said, I want the flag. This was the really weird one. She talked about feminazis, which is like an old school Rush Limbaugh anti-liberal slur from 30 years ago. And she also said her idea of a great flag that she came up with, because she said, I think about these things all the time. She said a white flag with orange and yellow and like flames around it kind of, and then with the word vergogna in Italian, which means shame. And so white with flames. And she's like, oh, here's her quote. I'll be free to fight back once we're free from all this nonsense. So yes, of course, anybody in this country is entitled to have an opinion. They're entitled to express it, fight for it, no question, right? But in this context, like with all the controversy surrounding Justice Alito, it draws to the fore that there is a culture war that is being engaged in at the highest level, at the level that is supposed to be above this partisanship.
It's interesting that she made reference to being German and then reference to being Italian. I mean, she's working her way through the whole axis. I mean, it's just kind of bizarre and interesting that she didn't see that. But I just want to go back to the journalism ethics thing. I mean, I did speak to a friend who said it's kind of like Barbara Ehrenreich doing nickel and dimes, or Jack London with People of the Abyss. I mean, that's what people do. They kind of go underground. But I don't know. I think it's a little bit different when you're getting people to trust you and talk to you, so in a gotcha kind of thing. But like I said, I as much as I sort of am uncomfortable with it, there's another part of me that's really glad she did it, because it has revealed a few things, and it does have the Supreme Court it has revealed the problems with the Supreme Court that now are probably going to have to be addressed some way. And the Supreme Court is now sort of under siege, and the Republicans right now are going to have to defend it by trying to cut it off. The Democrats are trying to pass bills. As Roberts has already said, that's interference. But Roberts also said to even have a discussion is interference. That we've discussed this, what I consider to be hypocrisy, when he has nothing to say about major Republican figures showing up at a trial in New York City that is a state court trial and calling it a sham when when they don't even really know what's going on inside. I mean, it's just that's interference. Or calling on the Supreme Court to come in where it really doesn't have jurisdiction, right? I mean, it's just, but he has nothing to say about that. So the partisanship of what is appropriate, it calls the whole thing into question. Unfortunately, we don't have a common media anymore. So we're discussing it on our media. They're discussing it whatever on their media. I don't even know what they're discussing on their media about this particular story. I'm sure they're covering the outrage that they were recorded in secret, and as far as they're concerned. But this is a serious matter. We have Supreme Court justices. I mean, we've always had conservative and liberal justices, but they weren't partisan, ideological. Oliver Wendell Holmes was a conservative justice, but he did not let ideology affect his decisions. He was dissented against a decision in which the majority would not allow for for there to be regulations of bakers that would make it. It was a city had passed an ordinance to make baking conditions safer, And the majority said that interferes with their inherent right to contract. And Oliver Wendell Holmes, a very conservative, said the Constitution doesn't tell us. Basically what you're saying is that anything other than capitalism is unconstitutional. The Constitution doesn't tell us what kind of economic system we can have. I mean, basically saying socialism is not unconstitutional. And he was a conservative. I mean, that's the kind of justices we need. We don't. I mean, that is kind of what Justice Roberts may be, hopefully, or at least aspires to be. Clearly, Justice Alito is not. I don't believe Justice Thomas is either, and I'm concerned about a couple of others. I have not seen this level. I've seen there's been some very liberal justices, but I've not seen this type of partisanship. Not from Brennan, not from Brown, or pardon me, Marshall, not from any of the most liberal justices have I seen anything like this.
I know we have just minimal time left, so I'll just say that this ethics reform is the response that's being proposed by critics. They're saying, look, here's another example of how we at least need to have some avenue, some mechanism of accountability beyond the sort of vacuum that exists right now. Chief Justice Roberts has obviously been highly resistant to that. The Democrats, the only way they could even subpoena him to get him to force a conversation would be if every Democrat on the Judiciary Committee was unanimous. That may or may not happen, but I think there's going to be even more pressure. In one of my prior predictions, I had mentioned that I thought that they just from a perspective of institutional integrity, that the Supreme Court would voluntarily come up with some similar version to the reforms, the ethics policies that apply to all the other federal judges. I thought that was a face-saving effort that wouldn't really undermine their authority very much. If that doesn't happen, then that opens the door. Talk about Trump's Pandora's box that he talks about with people who go against him. I think that if the American people see the court as a overtly political institution, it will be a massive reform that's proposed, as opposed to just some minor, ethics harmonization with the other federal judges, which seems far more reasonable.
Eeny, meeny, chili beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
This week, I'm going to talk about New York's 16th Congressional District, incumbent Representative Jamal Bowman, who is a member of the Squad, which means he's, one of the core progressives there in the House. He has, just for obvious reasons, so he gets his big name supporters include Senators Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. He's being challenged by Westchester County, New York's executive, whose name is George Latimer. Today, Hillary Clinton came out and endorsed George Latimer, making it even harder for Jamal Bowman to potentially get reelected. Early voting starts tomorrow in New York State, so this is the prime time to see what happens. This race has gotten very ugly because Jamal Bowman is basically saying that our challenger is racist, and that he's bought and paid for. He's basically tarnishing the reputation of the establishment Democrats. So it's a head-on confrontation. One of the key issues of this race has to do with Jamal Bowman being publicly outspoken about the war in Gaza, the Palestine perspective being represented in sort of a fair way, whereas most mainstream establishment folks don't want to speak to the Palestine conflict from anything other than a massively sort of pro-Israel, where there are allies at all costs position. So polling indicates that Latimer is strongly ahead already, 21% advantage, it's 17% advantage currently, which is split where the older you are, pretty much, the stronger it gets. his support, Latimer's support. The only group that Bowman has an advantage is people under 40, which tracks very closely to that Palestine-Israeli conflict opinion. So my prediction is that Latimer will unseat the incumbent Bowman by a sizable margin. It looks like it's going to be somewhere near 20%, and the establishment will successfully remove one of the squad members.
All right, I'm going to try to be real quickly here. In vitro fertilization is now becoming a big problem for the Republicans. Chuck Schumer has brought it to a bill for a vote. Republicans are crying foul. They are claiming, and it probably is, and it probably was time for the Southern Baptist Convention, which has now taken a stand against in vitro fertilization. You had Harrison Butker calling it human beings trying to play God. It became a big issue in Alabama. I am predicting that when this measure comes up, the Republicans have already tried to take maneuvers to take it off. Looks like it's coming up for a vote tomorrow. I predict that it will pass the Senate. It won't pass in the House. It won't even be raised in the House. But only a few Republicans will vote for it. They've been put on the spot, and this is going to become an issue. Come the fall. In vitro fertilization is all of a sudden a political weapon for the Democrats. We'll see what happens with that. But until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.